bum, 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 Iran. Bum, 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 Iran. What country's got a feeling really in the ceiling? Bum, Iran. Bum, 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 Iran. Went to a mosque, gonna throw some rocks. Tell the Ayatollah, gonna put you in a box. Bum, Iran. Bum, 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 Iran.
I'm Frank Vaughn. It's June 22nd, 2025, a Sunday, and God help all of us. Because humans are left to their own devices, and sometimes those of us who are without power and influence are left with nothing but our prayers. The Americans have bombed Iran. They've made it official. Their entry into the war, as far as I'm concerned, is almost guaranteed. The neocons are in control of the White House. It's very easy to see. There are some good people in the Trump administration, but there's also a bunch of people who want to draw the Americans into this war, because you need to understand, and stick with me, because there's going to be a lot to cover here. I got to talk to you about American weakness for a second. There's this idea that America is mighty and uncontestable, and this is an idea shared by those neocons. They see America as still being inside of the unipolar moment. They do not see the empire in decline, and make no mistake, America has an empire. Any nation that has that many bases and that many troops stationed on every single continent across the world is imperial. Look to Rome, look to the British. It's an empire, and it's an empire in decline. The neocons live in denial of that. They want to make sure that America stays on top. They oppose the multipolar world which we are now moving into. With John McCain's dream coming true, not just with Iran, but also in Ukraine. This is the foreign policy of McCain and Lindsey Graham is still unfolding before our eyes. I want people to understand something about the American military. They have a $1 trillion defense budget, but what does it buy? It buys very technologically advanced weaponry, but of limited inventory. And this is pretty important, because the world that we're living in right now is a world of ballistic missiles. The wars that we're fighting drones, we're fighting missiles, and America is seeking to maintain air power, because that is the cornerstone of American military might. The THAAD system. Let's just start there. There's going to be a lot today, folks. I don't know how long this video is going to go on for, and I really hope you watch it, because I need you to understand some things. The THAAD system is the most advanced American missile countermeasure, and they're being used to protect Israel right now. I need people to understand the difference. We refer to the Israeli Iron Dome, but it's actually, the Iron Dome is the cheapest component. It's designed to stop cheap, mass-produced Hamas missiles raining down on Israel. That's what the Iron Dome is. And then you have David Sling, and then you have Arrow, and then you have the THAAD system. Each one intercepts missiles of a higher quality, higher caliber, higher speed at higher altitudes. The THAAD missile system is very expensive. The United States of America, the makers of the THAAD system, have only manufactured in their lifetime 900 to 1,000 rounds. That's the rounds. That's the reloads. That's not the system itself. They produce less than 100 or up to 100. It's certainly not more than 100 per year at great expense. Those B-2 bombers that drop those big bombs, they're $2 billion a piece. The American military is very advanced, but there's a limitation, and the limitation is inventory. Each THAAD that's fired has to be replaced. That inventory has to be stockpiled. The Americans don't build cheap mass weaponry the way the rest of the world does. They have a problem. They have a strategic problem. Their weaponry is highly advanced with lots of bells and whistles and very expensive and of extremely limited inventory. They don't build cheap stuff. So, for instance, I was researching this all last night. That's how I came up with the THAAD numbers. And then you start to build on that and understand Patriot missiles, which if there was a prolonged war with Iran, Patriot missiles would be one of the cornerstones of protecting the American Navy. Do you realize that during the operation, the recent operation where America was bombing Yemen, bombing the Houthis, they came very close to a missile strike on an aircraft carrier? They actually dropped one of their planes into the ocean because the carrier had to maneuver so fast. That close. And we're talking about the Houthis. We're not talking about nation-state actors. And we have to consider that too. And I don't want to get too distracted, but coming up in this talk is going to be an analysis of the Pacific Theater. That's why the map is on the screen. But just put a pin in that for a moment. Because over the last 3 years fighting the war in Ukraine, America has been the number one thing that Zelensky wants in terms of aid is Patriot systems and anti-missile systems. And so the Americans have obliged. When the war began with Hamas and Hezbollah, the reserve supply of inventory that America set aside to help Israel in the event that Israel was attacked was already depleted because it had gone to Ukraine. We're playing with very limited inventory, which means the ability to sustain a war is limited. And it's very difficult for the Americans to ramp it up. Here's another statistic for you in terms of cheap hardware, because cheap's kind of essential here. You have to remember that Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, defeated the Russian army and defeated the U.S. army. And they did it with desert people running around with AK-47s and the cheapest weaponry imaginable. Trillions of dollars, both Russian and American, lost in Afghanistan trying to rule that place. They were beat by tribesmen on donkeys. So keep that in mind, because Iran is more sophisticated than Afghanistan, but they build a lot of cheap stuff. But here's that statistic I was trying to get around to. The Russians alone, on their own, manufacture more artillery in 3 months than the entire NATO alliance manufactures in a year. That's just one troubling statistic. In a prolonged war, and this is why I think there's a chance, I don't know for sure because I'm just me. But if the Iranians are holding back some of their capacity, they have allies. They have allies in Turkey. They have allies in Russia. The foreign minister of Iran was in Turkey yesterday at a conference. I can't remember the name of Islamic countries. Maybe we'll look at a clip of that in a bit. He's in Russia today. They have allies in the region. Medvedev, who often, as the prime minister of Russia, often is the more hawkish voice of the Russian government. Putin's more diplomatic. Medvedev is more hawkish. He says multiple countries, and I know people are in direct denial about this, multiple countries are ready to transfer to Iran directly nuclear weapons if the Americans get bogged down in a war. Now, some people say, oh, it's just Russia, it's nothing else. People make a lot of assumptions so that they can cling to their narratives. But there's Pakistan, which is closely aligned with Iran. There's China, which is already sending military aid to the regime. And there is Russia. So there's a lot of people signaling certainty out there, but nothing is certain. And one of the reasons, or one of the things that we need to consider is, look at this map for a minute. You see on the map, there's my mouse, you see the Nimitz. The Nimitz is no longer there. The Nimitz, if it's not in the Middle East yet, it's going to be there very soon. Steaming there very fast. It's probably there already. So you have the Carl Vinson and you have the Nimitz in the region. You have the George Washington off the coast of Japan, which is where I think it is. You have the Tripoli. Basically, the point I want to make is there's this great big void in the South China Sea. People need to understand, we are moving into a multipolar world. Another note that's related to this, and this is going to be all over the place, and I hope I can bring it together and keep it cohesive for you. People are always worried about the ultimate power of the United Nations, the strategic development goals, the power of Paris, the power of the World Economic Forum, the power of this international order. Keep in mind that the United Nations power has just been proven to be limited yet again, because whenever it suits the West, they go and they bomb whoever they want. And the United Nations condemns. Or Israel goes and bombs whoever they want, and the United Nations condemns. It's just words. It's just a bunch of noise. The United Nations has absolutely no power to stop any of this from happening. So that should give you a glimmer of hope when it comes to their objectives, when it comes to the SDGs and diversity and everything else, all the other toxic crap that they're doing. Governments have to voluntarily go along with the United Nations, and they have absolutely no teeth to stop them from doing otherwise. This bombing of Iran is completely illegal under international law. Whether you're an Israeli homer or not, I'm not taking sides here. I'm really doing my best, because I do have my own preferences about the way the world should work. Most of them are framed from my life here in Canada, but I want to keep that out of my work. What I'm trying to do is highlight reality, because everybody else is on one side or another, and I'm just trying to find that vein right down the center where we get to facts. So back to the South China Sea for a minute. There's no aircraft carriers in the region outside of the George Washington that can get to Taiwan in a reasonable amount of time. So back to the neocons for a moment. I need it to be understood that they are in denial about the world changing. They're in denial about the fact that the United States and NATO alone are no longer the only coalitions that can defy the United Nations and do whatever they want, whether it's bombing Libya, interfering in Syria, going into Iraq, all of these unilateral things that were condemned by the international community. It's only been the West, and particularly the United States, that has claimed the ability to act unilaterally. Everybody else isn't allowed to do it. So in February of 2022, the Russians upset that order. Now, they've done some things. They did some things in Georgia, and they've done some things in Chechnya. We're just set that aside, because that is small stuff compared to the intervention in Ukraine, which is how they view it. The Ukrainian government was discriminating and killing and doing all kinds of horrible things in East Ukraine, and the Russians finally had enough, and so they intervened. Now, the West and our media and most of our people call it an invasion, but to the Russians, it's an intervention. Do you think the Iraqi people viewed the American involvement in Iraq as an intervention or an invasion? Do you think the people who are loyal to Gaddafi, when Libya was one of the most prosperous countries in Africa, do you think they viewed the bombs that fell on their heads, creating the conditions of chaos and open-air slave markets that reign to today by allowing Gaddafi to be killed, do you think they viewed that as an intervention or an invasion? You see, it's all about perspective. It's all about where you're coming from. The Russians intervened in Ukraine via their perspective, and I would dare say they intervened. Like, if I had to use one word or another, I would call it an intervention, based on Western standards. And we've been engaged in this fight because they're not allowed to do that. Only the Americans in the West can do whatever they want in the world. Only Israel can do whatever it wants in the world. Everybody else has to obey the rules. And so here we are, 3 years later, almost 3.5 years later, which is a pretty key moment in time, actually, the 3.5-year mark to the conflict in Ukraine. It's one I've been waiting for since it began. I dare say, since February of 2022, the day it launched, I started counting down 3.5 years, and I'm not going to get into why. But this whole situation is unfolding pretty much the way that I saw it unfolding from February forward. So keep in mind that other nations in our multipolar world are going to liberate themselves from this notion that they're not allowed to intervene in theaters of operation that they deem necessary for their national interest. We live in a world of nuclear power and nuclear arms. We live in a world where the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Pakistanis, anybody that's got nukes has a sphere of influence and a set of national interests which must be valued by the other members of the nuclear club or the world sunders. And we're playing a game against that right now because the Americans view, or there's many people in the American government that view their ability to act unilaterally as singular, only applying to them. So, there's a concentration of force happening in the Middle East as we speak. American systems, defensive systems, missile defense systems are being deployed to help Israel defend itself as it bombs the living hell out of Iran. And now America has joined in the operation. So we'll see what happens, but I would expect it isn't going to stop at nuclear weapons. All this talk about it not being about regime change, it is about regime change, and it's about getting Trump drawn into this war. Whether ground troops come in 6 months or a year or however this whole thing plays out, I don't see it being limited. I think there might be a break at some point in hostilities, but I don't see this going away because this is like the geopolitical fulcrum. This is the hinge between the past and the future, and it's becoming very kinetic. As the Americans expend more of their resources defending themselves and Israel in the Middle East, these hard-to-replace, highly advanced weapon systems, China is sitting there biding its time and waiting. It suits Chinese interests, especially via Taiwan, to have American force concentrated in the Middle East. If they can draw America into a war with Iran, a very hard war to prosecute, similar to Afghanistan, except there's more Iranians. Just as a for instance, there was this notion in the opening days of the war that the Iranian people would spontaneously rise up and overthrow the government. They made all these calls, and I remember watching Netanyahu give a speech and thinking to myself, this is just theater and optics for the Western audience. The spontaneous uprising that you're talking about isn't going to materialize, especially after you keep dropping bombs on them for a week or two, which now, just today, there was a huge rally in Tehran. In spite of all the bombs and all the calls from Israel and America to evacuate practically the entire city so it can be bombed with abandon in an attempt to create the impression that Western leaders care about civilian lives. They don't. And I'm not judging them for that. Okay? War is hell. Civilians die on both sides. You always see people you see nation-state actors and you see causes try to martyr themselves when their civilians die at the same time as they're killing civilians. The Israeli media is full of Iran is targeting our mosques and our churches and our people, and they're hitting civilian targets, and we're victims. How many civilians have died in Gaza and Lebanon and Iran? This is war. That's what happens. What I find objectionable is the manipulation of the emotional reactions of people to create this victim mentality. At any rate, it suits neocon interests to do regime change in Iran. It suits their interests to get Trump bogged down in this war. And what happens when? I think it's a matter of when. I don't think it's a matter of if, but we'll see. What happens when American troops start dying to ballistic missiles? What happens when those inventories start getting drawn down? What happens when America has to go in and bomb again? Because again, Marco Rubio came out today and he said, we don't think we fully got Fordo. So that might necessitate a second bombing run. You see how it works? You do the first one, then you got to do a second one. And it's incrementalism, getting Trump drawn into the very war that he was trying to avoid, because I believe he genuinely wanted to avoid it. But he's being pulled from all sides toward this. It's like gravity. And he still has some people around him that are cautioning to exercise restraint. But right now, it seems to me those people who are advancing towards warfare, they're winning. But it's not just the neocons that want this. The Chinese want it too. They want it too. They got to get American power bogged down and weakened. And if they will use Iran to do that, and what that enables, and this is the black horse, this is the dark horse, this is the thing that no one sees coming, is the Chinese move on Taiwan. With America distracted, with everybody looking the other way, the Chinese can take that island in a matter of days. And what a shock to the world that would be. The South China Sea is empty of American power as we speak. And this all links back to the changing geopolitics of this world, the multipolar world that we're coming into. these nations, Russia and China, are no longer going to feel beholden to the international order. It's remarkable how well people have complied, considering the Americans are the only ones that flout it whenever they want. The international order doesn't mean anything to the empire of the day. And now the Russians and the Chinese, and dare I say others, are going to start figuring out that they can start doing things on their own too. What's the United States going to do against China? How are they going to stop them? Every bomb that falls on Iran creates the pretext for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And for other actions in other theaters, which we don't need to get into today because we're getting ahead of ourselves. The headline is Shocking Claim. Tehran says uranium was moved before strike. There's nothing shocking about that. There was satellite imagery from days ago that showed truck activity at Fordo. They moved it out. So, maybe without the president's knowledge, maybe he was not informed. It actually makes sense to me that he wouldn't be informed that the uranium was moved because all the pressure was on whether to bomb or not bomb. Now, this is also failing to take into account the fact that maybe the president actually has known the entire time, inside the greatest deception, how Trump and Netanyahu fooled the world. Publicly at odds and seemingly out of sync, Trump and Netanyahu lulled Tehran into complacency only to unleash the most devastating strike on Iran's nuclear program in history. Again, this is from JFeed. These are Israeli homers. So, I mean, people need to prepare themselves for the idea that Trump isn't some kind of innocent victim, that he's been led in this direction, but with prior knowledge, that he knew this is what they were going to do with Iran, even maybe when he was campaigning in the later stages of the campaign before the election, but certainly once he got into office, that this day was going to come and he had knowledge of it. Either way, whether he knew or he didn't know, nobody should be shocked by Marco Rubio's statement that they didn't get everything at Fordo, and nobody should be shocked that now the uranium has been moved. Guess what? Maybe it's been moved to a deep underground facility in another location. Maybe we need more of those American bombs. American involvement deepens. There's a lot of people in the world, the Russians, the Chinese, the neocons, the Israelis, who benefit by drawing America into a prolonged and protracted war in Iran. And that's what they're trying to create. And all the MAGA bots out there who are just, he's my president and I'll stand with him, I trust the plan and all that stuff. You guys are walking into the same trap as your president. Now, again, Trump may know, he may not know. This may not be a trap. This whole thing could be a very cleverly designed operation. The trajectory just seems very clear to me. Deplete American stockpile, deplete Israeli stockpile. Israel's kind of a sideshow when it comes to China and Russia's interests in the world. This whole thing, Israel's kind of kicking things off. They're creating the opportunity that others are going to take advantage of. It's about America. It's about weakening America. Whether you have casualties on American servicemen overseas, which, by the way, every single day I wake up to headlines reminding me, as though it's news, fresh that day, that the Nimitz is on its way to the Middle East. I mean, the Nimitz has been on its way to the Middle East for days. Again, I woke up this morning and I got a new headline. Nimitz on its way to the Middle East. A carrier due to be retired. Why am I being reminded every single day that the Nimitz is on its way to the Middle East? I wouldn't want to be a sailor on that ship right now. Whether it's Americans overseas at military bases or it's these professed Iranian sleeper cells in the United States I just read, and we don't know what this is, but I just read about a gunman. I saw a headline in between cuts about a gunman in Michigan. We don't know what that's all about. But if sleeper cells start waking up in the United States and killing off American civilians, well, that draws Trump deeper into a conflict with Iran. I think the trajectory is inevitable here, folks. I think America's going to end up in this war. But the thing that I don't think people understand or they don't see coming, and it's interesting because I was looking at crypto today. It's below 100K. We'll see what happens. I've been talking about how the market has not priced in World War III. And I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were talking about this very thing, and his observation, which makes sense, is it's because it's unthinkable. You keep carrying on living in the world that you're living in as though that world's going to keep ticking on, because World War III means your world is over. Your way of thinking about things is over. And what is World War III anyway? It doesn't necessarily equate to direct warfare between the powers. Not right away, anyway. See, the Second World War, like I said, this was going to be all over the place. The Second World War would not have occurred without the First World War. The First World War was an introductory moment. And the mishandling of the peace and the mishandling of, I identified in another video how villainizing Germany in the First World War was a terrible move, because there was no bad guy in the First World War. But we always have to do that, right? We got to demonize the loser. So in the First World War, it was just a bunch of alliances. It was the alliance systems drew everybody in. They created all these peace arrangements, the Versailles Treaty, Locarno, the interwarriors, creating the conditions for the Second World War, which was the truly devastating war. So we are in the First World War period of the 2020s, of the 21st century. So World War III doesn't necessarily look like what you think, which is total nuclear conflagration. What it looks like is a realignment. So as America gets drawn into this conflict, which I think is inevitable, I could be wrong, but I think it's inevitable at this point. Happy to be wrong. Would love to be wrong, because it's bad. It's bad for the empire. It's bad for Canada. It's bad for the West. But if they do, it will embolden China to make a move. This is really good for China, because they mass produce cheap armaments, just like the Russians with the artillery that I talked about earlier. The Chinese are capable of producing lethal, cheap armaments that they can ship to Iran. If we're stupid enough to get involved in a ground war, it's going to look a lot like Afghanistan, but much better armed and organized. And eventually all those, like I've seen pictures of those B-2 bombers, beautiful pieces of technology with all of the hardware that goes, all the ordnance that can go on a B-2. But what these pictures and this outpouring of love and adulation for American power, what it fails to convey is the lack of depth. American power is ultimate, but it can't be sustained. Not easily, anyway. You have to ramp up production. It's not happening. So cheap countermeasures beat the American army on the ground. Afghanistan proved it. It's not going to be a popular opinion, but there it is. China benefits. They need a weaker America because China's position is not strong. They have to keep weakening that huge, massive empire with their economic might, strengthening BRICS and doing all these things. And at a certain point, when America's attention is focused in the Middle East, they move on Taiwan, and all of a sudden the world officially changes. The masses of the people might actually get it at that point, that the unipolar moment is over. Hopefully they turn on the neocons at that point, because right now, the neocons seem to be in the most respected positions. They seem to be in control, and voices like mine and voices like Tucker Carlson and voices like many others who are just trying to convey a realistic assessment, no one really likes us. No one really wants to hear what we have to say. It's kind of like you can come up with any comparison you want in history. People like their stories. They like their narratives. They like their comforts. They like to be patted on the head and basically told to trust daddy. Trust the plan is just trust daddy. Trust mommy and dad. We got this taken care of. They want that security. I'm not here to give you that. I'm Frank Vaughn. I'll see you in the next one. Did you know that I have a website, frankvaughn.ca, the ultimate repository for all of my work, and a backup location just in case the censors come for me again. And if you like the content, please consider using the donate link in one of the options available. There are no paywalls, there is no advertising, and there is no Patreon, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you for your time and your consideration.